Hello, everyone. My name is Ben Duckworth. Throughout my life, I have always been interested in United States law and how the inner workings of this country have a wide reaching effect on the general prosperity of the citizens who live in this nation. In this brief video, I will be explaining, analyzing, and elaborating on the question of whether churches and religious organizations should remain federally tax exempt. This seemingly obscure question has been analyzed and debated by government officials and the general public numerous times, especially in the past 2 decades, with the rise of megachurches used for profit and ran very similarly to businesses and capitalist ventures in the United States. Um, those who favor taxing churches often cite top church officials such as Billy Graham or Joel Osteen, who make millions off their churches and so-called non-profit foundations. They also argue that numerous churches have been proven to be politically involved and remain tax exempt. Um, this is against the law, and this occurs despite the explicit ban on political involvement for tax exempt organizations such as churches and religious organizations. There's another side of this argument, however. So, on the other side, many people still believe churches and religious organizations should remain untaxed by the federal government. Um, these people often argue that by banning political discourse among churches and religious organizations, in order for them to retain their tax exempt status, the federal government is violating the First Amendment's right to free speech and is also violating numerous censorship laws put in place not only in the Constitution of the United States, but other laws as well. I will first introduce an argument by Johnny Rex Buckles, a respected professor of law at the University of Houston Law Center. He claims that the ban of electioneering and ban of participating in political discourse among churches and religious organizations is unjust. Buckles argues these bans are a form of hyper-separationalism when referring to the common constitutional practice of the separation of church and state. The professor concludes that due to the First Amendment and censorship laws, the government has no right to take away the freedom of speech from tax-exempt organizations. My response to this statement, made by the well-respected professor, is that while it may appear that revoking the right to political discourse is unconstitutional, it actually promotes liberty in the United States. The government made sort of a trade-off with churches, that because they are tax-exempt, they cannot utilize political discourse among their congregation. The federal government is not banning free speech among churches and religious organizations, as every church undeniably has the right to free speech and political discourse. The government only commands that to remain tax exempt, churches have to follow the stipulations put in place for all other tax exempt organizations by refraining from political discourse. Churches still possess right to free speech. In fact, they practice free speech every day by practicing and congregating for religious ceremonies. Churches can also engage in political discourse with their congregation. Nobody is going to arrest the priest or pastor for doing this, as it is not against the law. These churches will just have to pay taxes if they choose to participate in political discourse. They are not censored, and they have not had their First Amendment rights revoked. I will now introduce Alan J. Szymanski. He's a professor of law at Ohio State University, and I'll be using a very similar structure and argument as I used to counter Johnny Rex Buckles' claims. Szymanski claims that taxing churches causes undue entanglement with government and religion. This is pretty similar to Johnny Rex Buckles' claims. However, Szymanski takes a more specific approach by saying that Some political issues are integral to a religion's belief, meaning that they're so important, even if they are political, religions have to preach about them. He gives an example of um, the Roman Catholic Church and their stance on abortion, and he says, "quote Catholics who vote for candidates who support abortion could jeopardize their salvation." End quote. He argues that it is important for church officials to discuss political ideas against their faith, and he also says that Catholic priests have to discuss certain politics against their religion. My counterargument to Szymanski's claim is similar to the one I adopted for Buckle's argument. There are some political issues that are extremely important to many religions, and as outlined by the law in the United States, these churches are free to speak on these political issues without fear of censorship and while retaining their First Amendment rights, so long as they forfeit their tax-exempt status. By remaining tax-exempt while participating in political discourse, these churches are breaking the law put in place by the federal government. In short, the government is not censoring or revoking rights from churches and religious organizations. They are merely putting strict stipulations in order to qualify to not pay taxes, which is a good thing in this country considering taxes are what makes our economy and our entire society function. Sarah Pulliam Bailey, a writer for the Washington Post, claims that the federal government loses millions of dollars a year by not taxing churches. This accumulated money could be put to use to help impoverished communities and people of color who are unfortunately disproportionately affected by the effects of poverty, starvation, and lack of basic human rights.